The issue particularly on the privatising.
The vacancies. In social care, it's even worse, and I know that firsthand as a former care worker, and that's something that we don't discuss enough. The second is that it allows the Secretary of State greater powers to intervene and is essentially a ministerial power grab. And the third is that it allows for greater privatisation of the NHS through integrated care systems. There are 42 of these, and private bodies will be allowed to sit on those, as has already happened with Serco in Bath and Somerset, and make decisions that are subject to less scrutiny. And that's a problem when we look at the last year or the last 18 months and the way that private contracts have been handed out to the likes of Randox and Serco for less scrutiny, to even less scrutiny to be on those, is disgraceful.
All right, let's talk to Dave West, who is the Deputy Editor at the Health Service Journal. Welcome to you. Dave, you will have heard what Nadia has said and obviously be aware of the campaign. Is she and others right to be concerned?
Good morning. On Nadia's third point, no, I think she's not right to be concerned. I don't think there's anything to be concerned about in relation to privatisation in relation to this bill. This bill, if anything, as some other Labour MPs who have been following this closely and know a lot about the health service have made the point, this bill, if anything, brings an end to contestability and the internal market in the NHS. So it is not, by any stretch, encouraging privatisation.
Right, in some ways?
Oh, apologies for the interruption. In some ways, because of competitive tendering, but that also means, and I have issues with that as well, but it does mean that contracts will be able to go straight to companies without a competitive tendering process. I think that the biggest problem here is that we're talking about restructuring, which costs money at a time that the NHS has been underfunded for a decade, and there is a huge crisis.
I understand that concern, but we want to investigate the claims, because obviously there is a disagreement here between what you are setting out and what Dave is saying in terms of concerns about creeping privatisation or more tendering to private sector companies. Dave, will you respond to what Nadia said?
Well, under the existing law, the Health and Social Care Act, brought in by the coalition government in 2012, there are quite substantial, the most requirements there's ever been on the NHS to tender services out to with potential bidders in the private sector. This will bring an end to that. There will, in extreme circumstances, still put some contracts out, but there's going to be much less encouragement of the NHS.
That doesn't get to the issue of the ICSs, though. So there are sort of two separate issues.
ICSs are NHS organisations, just like the NHS Integrated Care Board.
And what is an ICS? What is an ICS?
Some things about this bill are very complicated, and that's one. But the fairly straightforward aspect is that they are not a private sector organisation, and not something that's likely to encourage more private sector use in the NHS. They are a complex partnership of across health and local government, but to all intents and purposes, the bill is creating NHS organisations, NHS integrated care boards, which will take on NHS responsibilities.
I didn't say that they were
a
private organisation, but private bodies will be allowed to sit on them. That's a fact. The Conservatives put forward an amendment 25, but it was full of loopholes, didn't go far enough.
Well, at the minute, there's more restriction than there is at the minute, which is at the minute people can be selected to sit on clinical commissioning group boards if they wish to.
But the difference with this legislation, the one thing that would make those ICS...
Hang on, the two of you, because if you talk over each other, including me talking over the top, then no one can hear anything. There is still one point you haven't addressed that Dave has raised, and that actually he says it will restrict further that private sector involvement or private bodies actually being represented. What do you say to that? I mean, that is the direct opposite of what you're saying.
Well, these ICSs private bodies will be able to sit on them, and the difference that this bill makes is that it makes those bodies statutory, so that they have statutory powers.
But do you accept that if Dave is saying they're actually going to be restricted, there's going to be less of it?
I don't accept that, But I also don't want to get bogged down in a discussion about privatisation when, yes, that is important, and I reject privatisation of the NHS.
The privatisation debate is a distraction from the other points you make, which
this is part of a wider conversation about the
I know,
privatisation of the
but
NHS.
actually your tweet very clearly here, Nadia, does state
it's also about
that it's...
the other two issues that I've spoken about, which is the crisis in the NHS and a ministerial power grab, and the fact that this bill does nothing to address those.
All right, let